The winter of 1987 in northern Colorado's remote Wellington Range was the harshest in decades. When 30-year-old Sarah Mitchell lost her husband to a sudden heart attack that September, she never imagined she'd soon face a blizzard that would isolate her and her 3 young children for weeks in their mountain cabin. As temperatures plummeted to -40 and supplies dwindled dangerously low, the only soul brave enough to venture through the treacherous conditions was Thomas Begay, a reclusive Navajo hunter who rarely spoke to anyone in the nearby town of Pinecrest. What happened next would forever change both their lives and reveal how the most profound connections can form in the darkest moments of desperation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell stared out the frost-covered window of her cabin, watching helplessly as the blizzard intensified. The weather report on her battery-powered radio had warned of a significant storm, but nothing like this. Thick, heavy snow had been falling relentlessly for 3 days, the accumulation now reaching halfway up the door. Each powerful gust of wind made the old wooden cabin creak, its sound eerily similar to the way her husband Mark used to stretch in the morning, his joints popping as he prepared for another day of work at the Forestry Service. The thought made her heart ache. 4 months had passed since she found him on the kitchen floor. The doctors called it a congenital heart defect that had gone undetected. Just like that, at 32, Mark was gone. Sarah was left alone with their 3 young children, 8-year-old Emma, 5-year-old Jack, and 3-year-old Lily, in their modest cabin nestled in the remote Wellington Range, 20 miles from the small town of Pinecrest. "Mom, I'm hungry," Emma said, appearing beside her with a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her normally rosy cheeks were pale, her long brown hair tangled from sleep. Sarah forced a smile. "I know, sweetheart. I'm going to make some oatmeal. We need to be careful with our food, though." This was the part that terrified her most. When the storm had first hit, Sarah thought it might last a day or 2. She hadn't stocked the pantry as fully as Mark would have. He had always been the prepared one, checking weather patterns and ensuring they had enough supplies to last through any emergency. But in her grief, Sarah had let many things slide. She moved to the cabinet and surveyed what remained. Half a bag of oatmeal, 3 cans of beans, a jar of peanut butter, 5 cans of soup, and a small bag of rice. There was some jerky Mark had made the previous summer, and a few jars of preserved peaches and berries. At the rate they were going, they had maybe 5 days of food left. The propane tank for the stove was low too, but the most pressing concern was the firewood. The pile that normally would have been stacked high by October was barely enough to last another week. Mark had always handled cutting and stacking the winter's wood during the summer months. From the bedroom, Lily began to cry. The toddler had developed a worrying cough over the past day. Sarah moved quickly to pick her up, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "Shh, it's okay, baby," she whispered, pressing her lips to Lily's forehead. The child was burning. Up Jack appeared in the doorway, his favorite stuffed bear clutched tightly to his chest. "Is Lily sick?" "Just a little fever, buddy," Sarah replied, trying to keep the worry from her voice. She had children's Tylenol, but if Lily's condition worsened, Sarah couldn't complete the thought. The nearest hospital was in Westbrook, over 50 miles away. The landline had gone dead 2 days ago when the storm knocked out the power lines. Her cell phone showed no service, as was often the case in this remote area, especially during severe weather. They were completely cut off. Sarah carried Lily to the kitchen where Emma was already setting the table for breakfast. Despite being only 8, Emma had stepped up tremendously since Mark's death. Sometimes Sarah caught herself relying too heavily on her eldest daughter, burdening her with responsibilities no child should bear. But this morning she was grateful for the help. "Emma, can you watch Lily while I make breakfast? She's not feeling well." Emma nodded, her eyes clouded with worry beyond her years as she took her little sister. Sarah measured out the oatmeal carefully, making the portions smaller than usual. She needed to make every bit of food last as long as possible. As she stirred the pot on the propane stove, Sarah glanced at the calendar pinned to the wall. December 15th. Mark had circled the date in red. It was when his friend Ryan was supposed to visit from Denver. Ryan was Mark's childhood friend who had joined the Air Force and was finally coming home on leave. Mark had been so excited to introduce him to the kids. But Ryan wouldn't know about Mark's death. He wouldn't be coming to the cabin. No one would. After breakfast, Sarah bundled up to venture outside and check the generator. The snow had drifted against the side of the cabin, making it difficult to push the door open. The frigid air stole her breath as she stepped outside. The sky was a dense grey, snow still falling in thick flakes. The world had transformed into a white void. Even the tall pines that surrounded their property were barely visible through the whiteout conditions. The generator was housed in a small shed about 20 yards from the cabin. Sarah trudged through snow that reached above her knees. By the time she reached the shed, she was breathing heavily, her lungs burning from the cold air. The generator had just enough fuel to run for maybe 2 more days, if used sparingly. Sarah had been turning it on only for a few hours in the evening, trying to conserve the fuel. Without it, they would have no heat except for the fireplace. In this weather, that wouldn't be enough to keep the cabin above freezing. As she made her way back to the cabin, Sarah felt the first stirrings of real panic. How long would this storm last? What would she do when the food ran out? When the firewood was gone? When Lily's fever got worse? She had no family to speak of. Her parents had died years ago, and she was an only child. Mark's parents lived in Florida and had never approved of their son moving to the mountains of Colorado. They had minimal contact over the years and probably didn't even know he had died. Sarah had meant to write them, but grief had a way of making even simple tasks feel insurmountable. Back inside, Sarah found Emma reading a book to Jack and Lily on the couch, all 3 huddled under blankets. The sight gave her a momentary reprieve from her fears. Somehow they would get through this. They had to. That night the temperature dropped further. The wind howled with renewed vigor, finding every crack and crevice in the cabin's aging walls. Sarah kept the fire burning as long as possible before banking it for the night. All 4 of them slept in the master bedroom, the children in the bed, while Sarah kept vigil in the rocking chair beside them. Lily's fever had risen, her breathing labored and wheezy. Sarah dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Just before dawn, she was startled by a noise different from the storm's constant assault. It was a scraping sound, followed by a thud. Her heart racing, Sarah grabbed the flashlight and the rifle Mark had taught her to use for emergencies. She moved silently to the living room, pausing to listen. There it was again. Something or someone was outside the cabin door. Bears should be hibernating this time of year, but mountain lions were known to prowl these parts. Or perhaps some desperate drifter had gotten caught in the storm and found their isolated cabin. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaking. "Who's there?" No answer came, but the scraping continued. Sarah inched closer to the door, the rifle ready. Taking a deep breath, she yanked the door open. Snow cascaded into the entryway along with a blast of frigid air. Through the swirling white, Sarah made out a dark figure standing on the porch. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing what appeared to be animal furs over modern winter clothing. The figure was holding a snow shovel and had cleared a path to the door. The stranger's face was partially obscured by a scarf, but Sarah could make out dark eyes studying her from beneath a fur-lined hood. In the dim morning light, she saw he was Native American, his weathered skin the color of burnished copper. Beside him on the porch lay a bundle wrapped in canvas. Sarah kept the rifle raised. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man didn't respond immediately. He carefully set down the shovel and slowly reached up to pull the scarf away from his face. His expression was solemn, but not threatening. "Thomas Begay," he said, his voice deep and quiet, as if unused to speaking. "You need help." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Sarah hesitated, the rifle still pointed at him. She had seen this man once or twice in Pinecrest, always alone, always keeping to himself. People in town called him the Silent Navajo, a hunter who lived somewhere in the mountains and came to town only for supplies. "How did you know we were here? That we needed help?" Sarah asked. Thomas nodded toward the cabin's chimney. Smoke. Changed. Too thin. Running out of wood. His words were few, but his meaning was clear. Sarah lowered the rifle slightly. "My little girl is sick. We're almost out of food, and the phone lines are down." Thomas nodded once, then bent down to unwrap the bundle. Inside was a stack of firewood, a cloth bag that appeared to contain food, and what looked like a pouch of medicinal herbs. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the door. Sarah's instincts wrestled with her desperation. Mark had always told her to be wary of strangers, especially in their isolated location. But something in Thomas's eyes conveyed a quiet integrity, and truly, what choice did she have? She lowered the rifle completely and stepped back. "Please come in." Thomas carried the firewood to the nearly empty rack beside the fireplace, then placed the food and medicine pouch on the kitchen table. He moved with a deliberate economy, no motion wasted. "Your girl. How long are you sick?" he asked. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Since yesterday. She has a fever and a bad cough," Sarah replied. He nodded, opening the medicine pouch. "May I see her?" Before Sarah could answer, Emma appeared in the hallway, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "Mom, who's he?" "This is Mr. Begay," Sarah said, trying to sound casual for her daughter's sake. "He's brought us some supplies." Thomas acknowledged Emma with a gentle nod, his expression softening slightly. "Hello." Emma inched closer, her natural childhood curiosity overcoming her initial wariness. "Are you a real Native American?" "Emma," Sarah admonished, but Thomas's mouth curved in what might have been a hint of a smile. "Navajo, Dene, the people, A cry from the bedroom interrupted them. Sarah rushed to Lily, with Thomas following at a respectful distance. The toddler was flushed with fever, her breathing more labored than before. Thomas studied the child with concern. From his pouch, he removed a small glass jar containing a greenish paste. "Pine and sage, for the chest, may help breathing." Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "What do we do with it?" "Rub on chest, then steam." He moved to the kitchen, filling a pot with water from the jug on the counter. "Boil. Add this." He sprinkled dried leaves into the water, as Sarah applied the salve to Lily's chest. Thomas prepared the steam treatment. Jack had awakened and was watching the stranger with undisguised fascination from the doorway. "Are you a doctor?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "Hunter. Learned from my grandmother. Medicine woman." Within an hour of the treatment, Lily's breathing had eased somewhat. She was still feverish but seemed less distressed. Sarah felt the first glimmer of hope she'd experienced in days. Thomas moved efficiently around the cabin, making no conversation beyond what was necessary. He stoked the fire with the wood he'd brought, then disappeared outside again. Sarah heard chopping sounds and realized he was cutting more firewood from the forest surrounding the cabin. When he returned, snow crusting his clothing, he carried an armload of freshly cut logs. "Storm. 3 more days," he said, arranging the wood by the fireplace. "Need more. We'll return." "Wait." Sarah caught his arm as he turned to leave. "You can't go back out in that. It's getting worse. Thomas looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Have shelter. 2 miles. We'll come tomorrow. Sarah wanted to insist he stay, but she recognized the quiet determination in his stance. This was a man used to solitude, to making his own decisions, and he had already done more for them than she could have hoped for. "Thank you," she said, removing her hand. "I don't know how to repay you." Thomas shook his head slightly. "No need." He glanced at the children, who were watching him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "Tomorrow." With that, he pulled his scarf back over his face and stepped out into the swirling snow. Sarah watched from the window as his dark figure was quickly swallowed by the white void. That night, for the first time since the storm began, Sarah slept soundly. The cabin was warm, Lily's fever had reduced slightly, and they had enough food for several more days, thanks to Thomas's provisions. Dried meat, hard bread, and preserved berries. True to his word, Thomas returned the next day, and the day after that, each time bringing more wood, more food, and checking on Lily's condition. The herbal remedies he provided were slowly improving her symptoms. By the 3rd day, the little girl was sitting up and asking for food, though her cough persisted. Thomas spoke very little, but his actions conveyed more than words could. He showed Jack how to identify different animal tracks in the snow. He helped Emma learn to tie special knots that would be useful for various tasks. And he listened attentively when Sarah, starved for adult conversation, found herself telling him about Mark, about their life before his death, about her fears for the future. On the 4th day, the storm finally began to abate. The snow stopped falling, though drifts reached the windowsills. The sky remained grey, but patches of blue occasionally broke through. Thomas arrived earlier than usual, a determined set to his shoulders. "Road to town. Need to clear. Children should see a doctor." Sarah nodded in agreement. Lily was improving, but still not fully recovered. "But how? The road is miles long and buried in snow." "Others will help," Thomas said. He held out a small device, a ham radio, called Peterson, from Ranger Station. Sarah blinked in surprise. "You have a radio? All this time we could have called for help?" Thomas shook his head. "Storm, no signal until today." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Needed medicine first, radio second. His priorities had been saving them immediate, not connecting them to a town that couldn't reach them anyway. By midday, they heard the distant rumble of engines. Thomas and Sarah stepped outside to see 2 snowplows making their way up the winding road to the cabin, followed by a sturdy pickup truck. Bill Peterson, the forest ranger who had worked with Mark, was the first to reach them, trudging through the snow with a medical kit. "Sarah, thank God you're all okay. We've been worried sick since the phone lines went down." As Bill checked on the children, Sarah explained what had happened, how Thomas had appeared just when they needed him most. Bill looked at the Navajo hunter with newfound respect. "The silent hunter saved your lives," he said. "Thomas rarely speaks to anyone in town, lives up in that old cabin by Eagle Creek, hunts and traps the old way, been here longer than most folks can remember." Thomas stood slightly apart, seemingly uncomfortable with the attention. When the time came to transport Sarah and the children to town for proper medical care, he declined to join them. "Need to check traps," he said simply. Sarah felt a strange reluctance to leave. In just a few days, this quiet, steadfast man had become important to her family in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "Will we see you again?" she asked quietly. While the others were loading supplies into the truck, Thomas looked toward the mountains, then back at her. The usual reserve in his eyes had softened slightly. "Cabin needs repair. Roof leaks. West wall weak." It wasn't a direct answer, but Sarah understood. He would return, not because they still needed saving, but because something had formed between them. a connection neither had expected in this isolated, snow-covered wilderness. As the truck pulled away, Sarah looked back to see Thomas standing, motionless by the cabin, a solitary figure against the vast white landscape. Her children waved enthusiastically from the back seat, and to her surprise, Thomas raised his hand in return, a small gesture that somehow felt profound. The road ahead would still be difficult. She was still a widow with 3 young children, in a remote area. But for the first time since Mark's death, Sarah felt something beyond mere survival stirring within her. Perhaps it was simply hope, or perhaps it was the recognition that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected sources, and bonds can form in the harshest of circumstances, as silent and fundamental as the falling snow. The town of Pinecrest welcomed Sarah and her children with overwhelming support. Dr. Miller, the town's only physician, immediately examined Lily, prescribing antibiotics for what had developed into bronchitis. Another day or 2 without treatment, and we'd be looking at pneumonia, he told Sarah gravely. You're lucky that a Navajo fellow found you when he did. Lucky. The word seemed inadequate to describe what Thomas Begay had done for them. Sarah and the children stayed with Nancy Wilson, the elementary school principal, and an old friend who had a spare bedroom in her cozy downtown apartment. The townspeople rallied around them, bringing food, clothing, and offers of help. Sheriff Dan Collins organized a crew to plow the road to Sarah's cabin and check on the property. We'd been trying to reach you for days, Nancy explained as they shared tea in her kitchen 3 nights after the rescue. The children were asleep, Lily's breathing finally easy and regular. When the phone lines went down and then that second storm hit, Dan was planning a rescue operation, but the conditions were too dangerous. No one could get through. No one except Thomas. Does anyone really know him? Sarah asked, cupping her mug between her palms. Thomas, I mean. He barely spoke the whole time he was helping us, but he risked his life coming up that mountain. Nancy's expression turned thoughtful. He's been around these parts for about 15 years, lives completely off-grid up in that cabin by Eagle Creek, sells furs and handcrafted items to Dave's general store, but doesn't say more than a few words when he does. Some folks find him unsettling, but he's never caused any trouble. Do you know anything about his past, his family? Nancy shook her head. He's a complete mystery. The most I've ever heard him say was, "Thank you," when I complimented a beaded bracelet he'd made. She studied Sarah with curiosity. Why so interested? Sarah gazed into her tea. He saved us, Nancy. He appeared when we needed him most, like he somehow knew, and there was something about him, a stillness, a presence. She shook her head, unable to articulate exactly what had impressed her about the silent hunter. The next morning, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Dave Richardson, owner of the general store, arrived with a carefully wrapped package. Thomas Begay dropped this off at first light, Dave explained, handing it over. Asked me to deliver it to you. Wouldn't come himself. Sarah thanked him and waited until she was alone to open the parcel. Inside, she found 3 small, exquisitely carved wooden animals, a bear, a fox, and a wolf, along with a pouch of the medicinal herbs he had used for Lily. There was no note. Emma found her, mother staring at the carvings. Those are from the Quiet Man, aren't they? She asked. When Sarah nodded, Emma picked up the fox and examined it with admiration. He knew this is my favorite animal. I told him when he was teaching me about tracks. Sarah smiled. Which ones do you think are for Jack and Lily? Emma didn't hesitate. The bear is for Jack because he's always carrying his teddy bear, and the wolf is for Lily because she howls when she cries. That afternoon, Sarah visited the bank to assess her financial situation. The reality was grim. Mark had life insurance, but the policy was modest. Their savings would last perhaps 6 months if she was frugal. The cabin was paid for. It had been in Mark's family for generations, but property taxes, utilities, and basic necessities would quickly deplete what they had. "There are teaching positions opening up for the spring semester," Nancy suggested when Sarah shared her concerns. "You have your degree, you could apply." It was true. Sarah had taught high school English before Emma was born. She had loved it once, but the thought of returning to a classroom now felt overwhelming. "I don't know if I can balance teaching and taking care of the kids alone," she admitted. "We'll help," Nancy assured her. "This town takes care of its own." A week passed. Lily recovered fully, her energy returning with the resilience only children possess. The roads were cleared, and life in Pinecrest resumed its normal rhythm. Sarah knew she needed to return to the cabin, to begin rebuilding their lives, but something held her back. An unfinished feeling, a conversation not yet completed. Finally, on a clear, crisp morning, Sarah made a decision. She borrowed Nancy's truck and, leaving the children with her friend, drove to Dave's general store. "I need to know where Thomas Bigay's cabin is," she told Dave directly. The shopkeeper frowned. "Thomas values his privacy, Sarah, always has." "I understand that. But I need to thank him properly for what he did for us." Dave hesitated, then sighed. "Follow the North Fork of Eagle Creek about 3 miles up. There's a stand of aspens with unusual markings on them, old Navajo symbols. His place is just beyond that." The drive took nearly an hour, the truck laboring over snow-covered forest roads. Sarah almost turned back twice, questioning her impulse. What exactly did she hope to accomplish? Yet something propelled her forward. When she spotted the aspen grove Dave had described, Sarah parked and continued on foot. The symbols carved into the white trunks were weathered but distinct, geometric patterns and stylized animal forms that seemed both ancient and timeless. Beyond the trees, the land opened into a small clearing where a cabin stood, more substantial than she had expected. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. A workshop was attached to one side, and Sarah could see carefully arranged tools through the window. Nearby, a modest corral held 2 horses who watched her approach with curiosity. Sarah hesitated at the edge of the clearing, suddenly uncertain, but before she could retreat, the cabin door opened and Thomas stepped out. He showed no surprise at her presence, as if he had been expecting her all along. "Miss Mitchell," he said, inclining his head slightly. "Sarah," she corrected. "Please call me Sarah." He nodded once, accepting this. "The little one. She is better." "Yes, thanks to you. The doctor said your herbs helped prevent pneumonia." She paused. "I wanted to thank you properly and to return this." She held out the medicine pouch he had left with the carvings. Thomas made no move to take it. "Keep. Winter long. Children need. At least let me pay you for everything you did. The food, the firewood, the medicine." A frown crossed his face. "No payment." Sarah struggled to find the right words. "Then let us do something for you. You saved our lives, Thomas." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he gestured toward a cabin. "Coffee?" The simple invitation surprised her. "Yes, thank you." The interior of Thomas's home revealed a man of unexpected complexity. The main room was spare but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on diverse subjects: natural history, philosophy, indigenous cultures, astronomy. A telescope stood by the window. In one corner, an easel held a half-finished painting of the mountain landscape. At sunset? Sarah tried to conceal her surprise, but Thomas noticed her expression as he prepared coffee on a wood stove. Expected dirt floor, primitive conditions. There was no accusation in his tone, only a quiet awareness. "I didn't know what to expect," Sarah admitted. "You don't exactly encourage visitors." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Few ask. He served the coffee in handmade ceramic mugs, then seated himself across from her at a table by the window. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and feathery. "Why did you help us?" Sarah asked directly. "You risked your life in that blizzard." Thomas considered the question carefully, saw smoke change from the cabin, too thin, knew someone there, knew storm was bad. He paused, would not leave children too cold. But most people would have gone for help, contacted the authorities. No time, storm too fast, town too far. He took a sip of coffee, did what was needed. The simplicity of his explanation struck Sarah. He had acted not out of heroism or for recognition, but because he saw a need and had the ability to meet it. There was a fundamental integrity in that which moved her deeply. "The carvings you sent, they're beautiful. The children love them." Thomas nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. Made for them. Emma says you knew exactly which animal was right for each child." Children speak the truth. Easy to listen. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the snow through the window. There was something profoundly peaceful about Thomas's presence, Sarah realized. He carried none of the nervous energy most people did, the constant need to fill silence with words. "You paint," she observed eventually, nodding toward the easel. "Sometimes when light speaks." "And the books? You have more than the town library." This time a genuine smile transformed his face. Words, stories, different worlds. He gestured to a worn volume of Thoreau on a nearby shelf. "Some understand silence." Sarah found herself telling him about her own love of literature, how she had studied English and taught it before becoming a mother. Thomas listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed his own thoughtful engagement with the books he read. "You should teach again," he said, when she mentioned Nancy's suggestion about the spring positions. "I don't know if I can. Everything feels different now without Mark." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Loss changes path, not the destination. What was your loss?" Sarah asked, intuiting that he spoke from experience. He looked away, his gaze distant. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with deliberate care, he reached for a small wooden box on a shelf. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded, of a young woman with striking features and a serious expression holding an infant. Wife, son, car accident. Phoenix, 15 years ago. The simple sentences contained volumes of pain. Sarah understood. Now, his retreat to this remote place, his choice of solitude. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," he returned the photograph to its place. "Life continues. Different path." As the afternoon deepened, they talked of practical matters. Thomas offered to help. Repair the weak wall and leaking roof of Sarah's cabin. "Winter work slow. Have time. I couldn't ask you to do that." Not asking, offering. He paused. Children need a safe home. Before Sarah left, Thomas went to his workshop and returned with a small package wrapped in soft leather. "For you," he said. She opened it to find a pendant, a polished stone of deep blue-green, set in a silver bezel on a simple chain. "Turquoise," he explained. "Protection, strength, healing." His eyes met hers directly. "You have all three already. Inside." Sarah was touched by the gesture and its meaning. "It's beautiful, thank you." As she drove back to town through the gently falling snow, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. The grief was still there. It would always be there in some form, but alongside it now was a sense of possibility. The next few weeks established a new rhythm. Sarah and the children returned to their cabin, which the townspeople had stocked with supplies. True to his word, Thomas came to repair the roof and the weakened west wall, working methodically and with remarkable skill. He brought no crew, needing no assistance, though Jack appointed himself helper, and was given small, age-appropriate tasks that made him beam with pride. Emma, ever observant, noted the quiet harmony that developed between her mother and the Navajo hunter. "You smile more when Mr. Thomas is here," she told Sarah one evening after he had left. "Do I?" Sarah asked. Surprised by her daughter's perception, Emma nodded sagely. "And he talks more now. He told me 3 whole stories yesterday about how a coyote got his cunning." It was true. Thomas remained a man of few words with others. But with Sarah and the children, he had begun to share more. Navajo legends, knowledge of the natural world, occasional glimpses into his own past. He taught Jack how to identify edible plants and track animals. He showed Emma how to carve simple designs in wood. Even Lily, normally shy with strangers, would climb onto his lap for stories, fascinated by the rhythm of his voice. Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits, savoring the conversations that unfolded gradually like rare flowers. They discussed books they had both read, exchanged perspectives on nature and philosophy, sometimes simply enjoyed comfortable silence while working side by side. The town noticed, of course. Small communities always do. When Sarah went into Pinecrest for supplies, she occasionally caught curious glances, overheard whispered comments. Nancy was direct in her questioning. "So you and the silent Navajo, is there something happening there?" Sarah sighed. "His name is Thomas, Nancy. And no, we're friends. He's helping us get through the winter." Nancy raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Friends? Right." The truth was more complicated than Sarah could explain, even to herself. There was an undeniable connection between them, a mutual recognition of something essential. But there were also barriers. Their different worlds, the recency of her loss, the complexity of beginning anything new with 3 young children to consider. Thomas seemed content with the relationship as it was, neither pressing for more, nor withdrawing. He simply continued to be present, reliable, genuine. February brought another severe storm. This time Sarah was prepared, the cabin well stocked with food and firewood. Thomas arrived anyway, checking on them despite Sarah's insistence that they were fine. "No, you can manage," he said, still wanted to see. They sat by the fire that evening, the children asleep, a comfortable silence between them. Thomas had brought his flute and earlier had played soft, haunting melodies that entranced the children. "You've changed us," Sarah said suddenly. "All of us, especially me." Thomas looked at her questioningly. "Before you came that day in the blizzard, I was just surviving, going through the motions for the children's sake." She twisted the turquoise pendant she now wore daily. "I didn't know how we would make it through the winter, let alone the years ahead without Mark." "Strong woman. Would have found a way." Sarah shook her head. "Maybe, but you showed me something important. That I didn't have to do it all alone, that accepting help isn't a weakness." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Not only you who changed," he finally said. His voice was low, almost hesitant. 15 years, alone, by choice. He looked around the cabin, at the children's drawings now decorating the walls, the small signs of life and family. Forgot what was missing. The admission clearly cost him effort. Sarah understood its significance, this intensely private man acknowledging that his carefully constructed solitude had perhaps been lacking something essential. "The children adore you," she said softly. "Good children, brave, like a mother." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted, a possibility acknowledged but not yet given voice. Sarah found herself both drawn to and frightened by the potential she saw there. Thomas seemed to sense her conflict. With characteristic understanding, he moved the conversation to safer ground, telling her about a herd of elk he had spotted on the ridge that morning. The evening ended as others had, with Thomas departing into the moonlit snow, promising to return in a few days to finish the shelves he was building for Emma's growing collection of books. After he left, Sarah stood on the porch, watching his figure disappear into the trees, snow glistening in the moonlight around him. The cold air filled her lungs, clarifying her thoughts. She was standing at a crossroads, she realized. The path forward was uncharted, uncertain, but for the first time since Mark's death, she was thinking beyond mere survival, beyond just making it through each day intact. Thomas Bigay had arrived at their cabin door during the worst blizzard in decades, bringing not just physical salvation but something equally precious, the awakening of hope, the reminder that life continues, that loss changes the path but not necessarily the destination. As Sarah turned to go back inside, she touched the turquoise pendant at her throat. Protection, strength, healing. The qualities were indeed within her, as Thomas had said, but sometimes she was beginning to understand they needed someone else to help bring them to the surface. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fire still burning steadily in the hearth. The repairs Thomas had made had transformed the space, making it more secure against the winter's assault. Sarah looked around at this home that had once belonged to Mark's family, that had sheltered generations before them. It would shelter her children too, she determined. And perhaps in ways she couldn't yet fully envision, it might eventually shelter new beginnings as well. She added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, a different kind of thaw had begun. March arrived with the first hints of spring. Patches of ground began to appear beneath the melting snow, and the days grew longer. Sarah had accepted a teaching position at Pinecrest High School, starting with the spring semester. The routine gave structure to their lives. Mornings spent preparing the children for their day, teaching literature to teenagers who alternated between fascination and boredom, evenings devoted to her family. Nancy helped with childcare, picking up Emma and Jack from school and watching Lily until Sarah finished her last class. The arrangement worked well, though the days were long and often exhausting. Thomas continued his visits, less frequent now that the cabin was secure and winter was releasing its grip. Each time he came, he brought small treasures: early spring, flowers for Emma, interesting stones for Jack, a tiny handcrafted drum for Lily. For Sarah, he brought conversations that nourished her mind and spirit after days filled with the practical demands of single parenthood. One evening in late March, as Sarah graded papers at the kitchen table, Emma approached with her math homework and an unexpected question. "Mum, is Mr. Thomas going to be our new dad?" Sarah's pen froze mid-comment. "What makes you ask that, sweetie?" Emma shrugged with the casual directness of childhood. "Katie Peterson's mum got married again after her dad left. She says you need a dad to do dad things, and Mr. Thomas already does some dad things, like fixing stuff and teaching Jack how to whittle." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Thomas is a good friend who helps us, Emma. That doesn't mean he's going to be your new dad. And we're doing okay, aren't we? Even without a dad in the house." Emma considered this. "I guess. But you smile different when he's here, like you used to with Dad. Children saw too much sometimes." Sarah pulled her daughter into a hug. "Your dad was very special, and no one will ever replace him, but people can have different kinds of important relationships in their lives. Right now, Thomas is our friend. That's all." Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation, but her question lingered in Sarah's mind long after the children were asleep. Was there a future where Thomas could be more than a friend to their family? The possibility both excited and terrified her. The next day, Sarah received an unexpected call at school during her lunch break. It was Thomas, using the phone at Dave's store, something she knew he rarely did. "Spring ceremony," he said without preamble. "Important to my people. Would you and children come?" Surprised by the invitation, Sarah hesitated. What kind of ceremony? "Blessing way, for renewal. After winter," He paused. Special. Would like to share. The significance wasn't lost on Sarah. Thomas was inviting them into a part of his life he had never shared before. We'd be honored, she said. When is it? First full moon of spring, 3 days at sunset. He gave her directions to a location deeper in the mountains than his cabin. We'll wait at the fork in the road. Guide you. The call ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Sarah both intrigued and slightly nervous. She knew very little about Navajo ceremonies and wondered whether they would be welcome as outsiders. Yet Thomas wouldn't have invited them if it wasn't appropriate. When she told the children about the invitation, their reactions varied. Emma was immediately excited about the adventure. Jack had practical questions about what they would eat and where they would sleep. Lily wanted to know if there would be other children to play with. I don't know exactly what to expect, Sarah admitted, but it's important to Thomas, and he wants to share it with us. The afternoon of the ceremony arrived. With perfect spring weather, Sarah packed the children into her recently purchased used station wagon and followed Thomas's directions to the meeting point. True to his word, he was waiting where the paved road gave way to a dirt track that wound deeper into the mountains. Thomas was dressed differently than Sarah had ever seen him, wearing a traditional ribbon shirt in deep blue with intricate beadwork, his long hair tied back with a beaded leather cord. When they pulled up beside his truck, his expression was solemn, but his eyes held warmth. "Thank you for coming," he said, leaning down to the driver's window. "Follow, not far." The children waved excitedly as he returned to his vehicle. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves as they drove deeper into unfamiliar territory, the road becoming rougher and the forest thicker around them. After about 20 minutes, they emerged into a clearing where several other vehicles were parked. Beyond them stood a cluster of traditional hogans and modern tents arranged in a semicircle. People moved about the camp, preparing food at outdoor cooking stations or gathering in small conversational groups. Thomas parked and came to help them unload. "My family," he explained, gesturing toward the gathering. "Extended. Clan." Sarah was surprised. "I didn't realize you had family nearby." "Not nearby. Traveled. For the ceremony." He gave her a look that might have been slightly amused. "Not. Always alone." As they approached the camp, an elderly woman with a deeply lined face and bright, observant eyes came forward to meet them. Despite her age, she moved with remarkable grace and authority. "My grandmother," Thomas said with clear reverence, "Marion Begay." The old woman studied Sarah and the children intently, then broke into a warm smile. "Welcome to our gathering," she said in perfect English. "Thomas has told us about you." Sarah returned the greeting, suddenly self-conscious. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Begay. I hope we're not intruding." "Marion," the older woman corrected, "and there is no intrusion when an invitation is given." With an open heart, she bent slightly to address the children at their level. "And these must be the brave little ones who survived the great storm." Emma, never shy, stepped forward. "Mr. Thomas saved us. He brought medicine for Lily and showed me how to tie special knots." Marion's eyes twinkled. "Did he now? My grandson has many skills." She straightened and gestured toward the center of the camp. "Come, you are just in time." What followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The ceremony itself was conducted primarily in Navajo, with Marion occasionally translating key elements for their benefit. It centered around renewal, thanksgiving for surviving the winter, and blessing for the coming seasons of growth. Community members participated in different roles, some singing, others preparing special items used in the ritual. Thomas played a central part, his deep voice chanting prayers Sarah couldn't understand but could feel resonating through her. In this context, surrounded by his people and traditions, he seemed transformed, more expressive, more connected to something ancient and powerful. The children watched with wide-eyed fascination. Even Lily, normally restless, sat quietly in Sarah's lap, mesmerized by the colors, sounds, and rhythms of the ceremony. Afterward, there was a feast where Sarah and her children were treated as honored guests. Marion sat beside Sarah, explaining the significance of various foods and sharing stories about Thomas as a child. His early talent for tracking, his serious nature, his deep connection to the traditional ways, even while excelling in the white man's schools. He was studying engineering at Arizona State when the accident happened, Marion confided quietly, as they watched Thomas teaching Jack and several other children a traditional game across the fire. Afterward, he could not bear the crowds, the noise, the sympathetic looks. He came here to heal, did he? Sarah asked. Heal, I mean? Marion considered this. The body heals completely or not at all. The spirit is different. It can be whole again but forever changed, like pottery that breaks and is mended with gold, stronger at the broken places. Sarah touched her turquoise pendant thoughtfully. He gave me this. Marion's eyes sharpened with interest. Did he tell you its meaning? Protection, strength, and healing, he said. The older woman nodded. In our tradition, turquoise has great significance. It connects the earth and sky, represents life and the ability to thrive in difficult places. She studied Sarah's face carefully. It is not given lightly. Later that evening, as the celebration continued under the emerging stars, Thomas found Sarah sitting slightly apart from the main gathering, watching Emma dance with some of the other children to the beating drums. Too much? He asked, settling. Beside her on the log bench, Sarah shook her head. No, it's beautiful. I'm just taking it all in. She turned to him. Thank you for bringing us, for sharing this part of your life. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. Your grandmother is remarkable, wise woman, sees much. She told me about your engineering studies. I had no idea. Thomas gazed into the fire. Different life. Before. Do you ever miss it? That path not taken? He considered her question with his usual thoughtfulness. Sometimes. Knowledge is useful. Still design. Build. He gestured to the camp around them. But this connection to land, traditions, silence, needed this more. And now, Sarah asked softly, what do you need now? Their eyes met across the small space between them, the question hanging in the air with all its implications. Before Thomas could answer, Lily came running up, demanding to be swung in circles, as she had seen Thomas do with other children earlier. The moment passed, but something had shifted, a question asked that would eventually require an answer. They stayed until late evening, when the children finally succumbed to exhaustion. Thomas helped carry Jack and Lily, both deeply asleep, to the car. Emma, fighting to keep her eyes open, insisted on walking under her own power. Can we come back tomorrow? She asked through a yawn. Ceremony continues for 3 days, Thomas explained, but tomorrow's school day. We could come back next weekend, Sarah suggested, surprising herself with the eagerness in her voice. If that's all right? Thomas nodded, clearly pleased. Welcome. Any time. As they prepared to leave, Marion approached with a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. For your home, she told Sarah, pressing it into her hands. A blessing bundle, hang above your door. Sarah thanked her, touched by the gift and its significance. As she turned to get in the car, Marion placed a weathered hand on her arm. You have helped my grandson find his voice again, the older woman said quietly. For that, you already have my blessing. The drive home was quiet, the children sleeping peacefully in the back seat. Sarah's mind was full of the events of the day. The beauty of the ceremony, the warmth of Thomas's extended family, Marion's words, and the unspoken question that now hung between her and Thomas. Spring advanced rapidly after the ceremony. The snow retreated to the highest peaks, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the forest came alive with new growth and returning wildlife. Sarah finished her first semester of teaching with a sense of accomplishment, having connected with her students and rediscovered her passion for literature. True to Sarah's suggestion, they returned to visit Thomas's family gathering the following weekend and were welcomed as if they already belonged. Emma and Jack quickly formed friendships with the other children, learning games and picking up Navajo words and phrases with the natural linguistic facility of the young. Thomas's interactions with Sarah's children continued to deepen. He taught Jack to fish in the mountain streams, helped Emma identify native plants and their uses, and crafted a special cradle board for Lily's favorite doll, showing her how Navajo mothers had traditionally carried their babies. With Sarah, he began to share more of himself, his dreams before the accident, his struggle afterward, his gradual healing through reconnection with his heritage and the natural world. In turn, she confided her fears about raising the children alone, her memories of Mark, her tentative hopes for building a new life that honored the past while embracing the future. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch of Sarah's cabin watching a spectacular sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas spoke of his grandmother's wisdom. "She says, the path becomes clear when walked with open eyes," he said, his voice thoughtful. "That healing comes not from forgetting loss, but from allowing new growth alongside memory." Sarah understood he was talking not just about his own journey, but about hers as well, and perhaps about the path that was emerging before them both. "Your grandmother also told me I helped you find your voice again," she said, "but I think it was the other way around. You helped me find my strength when I thought it was gone." Thomas turned to look at her directly. "Found each other. Maybe that is the point." The simple statement held profound meaning. In that moment, with the light fading from the sky and the first stars appearing, Sarah recognized the truth of it. Their lives had intersected at a point of crisis, but what had developed went far beyond rescue and gratitude. There was a resonance between them, a shared understanding of loss and resilience, of silence and what it contained. When Thomas reached for her hand, the gesture felt both surprising and inevitable. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from work yet gentle in its touch. They sat together as darkness fell, not needing words to express what was growing between them. The following day, Sarah received unexpected news. The school principal had offered her a permanent position for the fall semester, with a salary that would provide financial stability. The children were thriving, Emma excelling in school, Jack overcoming his shyness to make new friends, Lily growing stronger and more adventurous every day. That evening, Sarah made a decision. She walked to the telephone and dialed the number for Dave's store, asking him to leave a message for Thomas to come by when he could. It was time for clarity, for honest conversation about possibilities. Thomas arrived the next afternoon. Sarah had arranged for Nancy to take the children for a few hours, wanting uninterrupted time for what needed to be said. They walked together to a small meadow near the cabin, where wildflowers had erupted in a riot of color. For a while they simply enjoyed the beauty around them, the birdsong, the gentle spring breeze. "I've been offered a permanent teaching position," Sarah finally said. "We'll be staying in Pinecrest." Thomas nodded. "Good news. You belong here. Do." "We..." Sarah turned to face him directly. This was Mark's home, his family's home for generations. "I came here for him, stayed for the children, but is it truly ours now?" "What does the heart say?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "That home isn't just a place. It's where you build your life, where you find your peace." She paused. "Where you find the people who matter." Thomas's dark eyes held hers steadily. "You matter, Sarah. Children matter. "And you matter to us," she replied. "The children adore you, and I—" She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. "I've come to care for you deeply." There was no surprise in Thomas's expression, only a calm acknowledgement of what they both had felt, developing over the months since that first desperate encounter during the blizzard. "Path not simple," he said. "Different worlds, different pasts. Different, yes, but perhaps complementary." Sarah gestured to the meadow around them, where various wildflowers grew together in natural harmony. "Like this, diversity creates something." "Beautiful," Thomas smiled at the metaphor. "Wise woman." "I've had good teachers," she replied, returning his smile, "including a certain silent Navajo hunter who taught me that strength can be quiet, that healing takes time, and that new beginnings can honor what came before." Thomas took both her hands in his. "No rushing river," he said. "Steady stream, find a way together." It wasn't a declaration of undying love or a dramatic proposal. It was something more authentic, an acknowledgement of what was real between them and a commitment to exploring it with care and respect for all it touched. Their individual journeys of healing, the needs of Sarah's children, the bridging of their different worlds. As they walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. The future remained unwritten, full of challenges and unknowns. But for the first time since Mark's death, she looked toward it with genuine hope and anticipation rather than fear and resignation. The path ahead would unfold one step at a time, just as this unexpected connection had, beginning with a desperate moment in a blizzard when a silent hunter had found the courage to approach a stranger's door, and a grieving widow had found the trust to open it. Summer arrived in a blaze of wildflowers and warm, golden days. For Sarah and her children, it brought a season of transformation. The school year ended, giving Sarah more time with Emma, Jack and Lily. Their days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings spent tending the small garden Thomas had helped them plant. Afternoons exploring the forests and streams. Evenings gathered on the porch, watching fireflies emerge as the mountains turned purple in the fading light. Thomas became a steady presence in their lives, though he maintained his own cabin and the solitude that remained essential to his nature. He taught Emma to identify medicinal plants, showed Jack how to build simple snares for small game, and delighted Lily with stories illustrated by figures he crafted from twigs and leaves. For Sarah, he brought a companionship that asked nothing of her, but allowed everything to unfold at its own pace. "You're good with them," Sarah observed one afternoon as they watched the children splash in the shallow creek behind the cabin. Thomas had spent the morning teaching them to build a small dam of stones and branches, creating a pool where minnows now darted in the clear water. Thomas watched the children with quiet satisfaction. Children understand the truth. No pretense. He glanced at Sarah, like their mother. Their relationship had deepened with deliberate care, each step taken with full awareness of all that was at stake, the children's emotional well-being, the memories they each carried, the different worlds they came from. They had not rushed, allowing trust and understanding to build naturally. The townspeople of Pinecrest had adjusted to the unlikely pair, initial curiosity giving way to acceptance. Thomas still spoke little when they went into town together, but he no longer seemed completely separate from the community. Dave, at the general store, had taken to saving articles on engineering and architecture from his magazines, knowing Thomas's background and continuing interest in design. Sheriff Collins occasionally consulted him on search and rescue operations, respecting his unparalleled knowledge of the mountain terrain. In July, Marion invited them to attend the summer gathering of Thomas's extended family. This time, they stayed for the full 3-day celebration, sleeping in a traditional hogan Thomas had prepared for them. The children were fully integrated into the activities, participating in age-appropriate ceremonies and games with the other young ones. On the second evening, as a traditional dance was being performed around the central fire, Marion settled beside Sarah on a woven blanket spread at the edge of the gathering. "My grandson smiles now," the elder woman observed, her eyes on Thomas as he showed Jack how to beat a rhythm on a small drum. "For many years, I feared his spirit had become like stone, solid but unable to grow." Sarah followed her gaze. "He's helped us heal. I hope we've done the same for him." Marion nodded. "The elders teach that healing is not found alone, but in the circle of life we create with others." She studied Sarah with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see beneath the surface. "You have questions you do not ask." It wasn't a question, but a statement, characteristic of Marion's directness. Sarah hesitated, then acknowledged the truth of it. "I wonder sometimes if I'm asking too much of him. The children, the different cultures, the memories we both carry. He values his solitude, his independence." Marion chuckled softly. "You think he comes to your cabin, teaches your children, shares his heart because of obligation. My grandson has never done anything he did not choose with full intention." "But we're so different." "Yes," Marion agreed, "as different as earth and sky, yet between them, all life exists." She gestured toward the dancers moving in intricate patterns around the fire. "Look at the dance. Each person moves differently, yet together they create harmony. This is the way of balance." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Thomas took Sarah to a high meadow where the stars seemed close enough to touch. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the mountain wilderness. "Your grandmother and thinks we balance each other," Sarah said finally. Thomas nodded. "Wise woman. And what do you think?" He considered carefully before answering, as was his way. "Think life has seasons. Winter of grief, spring of new growth." He looked at her, directly. Summer of decision. Sarah understood what he was saying. They had moved carefully, allowing their relationship to develop organically, but a threshold approached that would require conscious choice. "I don't want to change who you are," she said softly. "Your solitude, your traditions, your independence, they're part of what makes you who you are." Thomas took her hand, his touch warm in the cool night air. "Change has already happened, for both." He paused. "Question is what we build with change." Under the vast canopy of stars, they talked more openly than ever before about possibilities, how their lives might intertwine while still respecting individual needs, how to honor their different cultural traditions, how to create a family that embraced diversity as strength rather than obstacle. No firm decisions were made that night, but a direction was set, a shared vision beginning to take shape. When they returned to the camp in the silver light of early morning, something had shifted subtly between them, a deepening commitment, a clearer purpose. August brought challenges that tested this emerging bond. Jack developed severe pneumonia, requiring hospitalization in Westbrook for nearly 2 weeks. Sarah stayed at his bedside, while Thomas cared for Emma and Lily, bringing them to visit their brother daily. The crisis revealed the strength of what they had built. Thomas moved seamlessly into the role of caretaker for the girls, maintaining their routines while providing the emotional security they needed with their mother and brother absent from home. He coordinated with Nancy and other townspeople to ensure the cabin was maintained and that Sarah had everything she needed during her hospital vigil. When Jack finally recovered, the family returned home with a renewed appreciation for their interdependence. Thomas had proven himself not just a friend or romantic interest to Sarah, but a true partner in the fullest sense. Someone who stepped forward in crisis without hesitation, who understood the needs of each family member and met them with and quiet competence. One evening in late August, as summer began its transition toward autumn, Thomas arrived at the cabin with an unusual request. "Would like to show you something. All of you." They followed him deeper into the forest than they had ever ventured before, hiking for nearly an hour along a faint trail that wound through ancient pines and across bubbling streams. The children, accustomed now to woodland excursions, kept pace eagerly, excited by the mystery of their destination. Finally, they emerged into a hidden valley unlike anything Sarah had seen in their corner of the mountains. A small, crystal-clear lake reflected the surrounding peaks. Wildflowers in riotous colors carpeted the ground, and a waterfall spilled from the rocks at the far end, catching the late afternoon sunlight in rainbow prisms. "It's magical," Emma breathed, voicing what they all felt. "Sacred place," Thomas explained. "My people have come here for generations. Place of visions, decisions." He looked at Sarah with quiet intensity. Beginnings. As the children explored the shoreline under Thomas's watchful eye, he explained the significance of the valley in Navajo tradition, a place where important life transitions were contemplated, where harmony with the natural world would be most deeply felt. "My grandfather brought my father here when he was a boy. My father brought me." Thomas's gaze followed Jack as he carefully turned over stones at the water's edge, searching for creatures beneath. "Would like to bring your children. Often. As Ideb," he hesitated, searching for the right word. "As their stepfather?" Sarah suggested gently. Thomas nodded, his expression solemn, yet filled with undisguised emotion. "If you will have me. If children will accept." It wasn't a conventional proposal, but it was perfectly Thomas, thoughtful, connected to tradition, mindful of the children, heartfelt in its simplicity. Sarah took his hands in hers. "I think we should ask them, don't you?" They called the children to them, sitting together on a fallen log near the shore. Sarah explained in age-appropriate terms what Thomas was proposing, that he would become part of their family officially, that they would create a new kind of family together that respected the memory of their father while embracing a new future. Emma, always quick to process emotional complexities, looked at Thomas with serious consideration. "Would you live with us all the time? Or would we sometimes stay at your cabin?" "Both places could be home," Thomas replied. "Together we would decide." Jack had a more practical concern. "Would you teach me more about tracking animals and building things?" Thomas smiled. "Every day, much to learn." Lily, at 4, focused on the immediate and concrete. "Would you read me stories at bedtime? Daddy used to do all the funny voices." A shadow of uncertainty crossed Thomas's face. "Can try. Not good at funny voices." "That's okay," Lily decided magnanimously. "You do good animal sounds instead." The children's acceptance, each in their own way, moved Sarah deeply. They had lost so much with Mark's death, yet here they were, open to new bonds, new love. Children's resilience was a powerful force. "What do you think, Emma?" Sarah asked her eldest, knowing her opinion carried special weight. As the oldest, Emma had the clearest memories of Mark and had struggled the most with his absence. The girl looked thoughtfully at Thomas, then at her mother. "Dad would want us to be happy," she said with a wisdom beyond her years. "And Mr. Thomas makes us happy, makes you happy too, Mom." Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. "Yes, he does." "Then I think it's a good idea," Emma concluded. "But I'm still going to keep Dad's picture by my bed." "As you should," Thomas said firmly. "Always honor those who came before." They remained in the valley until sunset, the children playing, while Sarah and Thomas spoke of practical matters, where they would live, how to blend their different ways of life, when to take this step that would unite them officially as a family. "Marion will perform the ceremony," Thomas said. "If agreeable, combines traditions." Sarah liked the idea of a ceremony that honored Thomas's heritage while creating something new that was uniquely theirs. And afterward? Where will my home be? Thomas had given this considerable thought. Your cabin has memories. Good place for children's stability, but it needs work to accommodate all. He described his vision, expanding the cabin using sustainable methods and traditional Navajo design principles combined with modern efficiency. The result would blend their worlds physically, just as their lives would intertwine culturally and emotionally. My cabin can become a studio, workshop, place for solitude when needed, for all of us. It was a thoughtful solution that acknowledged both their need to be together and the importance of maintaining individual space, especially for Thomas, who would be adjusting to family life after years of solitude. As they hiked back through the forest in the gathering dusk, the children running ahead on the trail, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. The path that had brought them here had been marked by loss and hardship, but had led to something beautiful and unexpected. The week before the new school year began, they gathered once more in the sacred valley. Sarah, her children, Thomas, Marion, and a small circle of friends from both communities. The ceremony Marion conducted blended Navajo traditions with elements meaningful to Sarah's family. Emma read a poem she had written about new beginnings. Jack presented Thomas with a hand-drawn picture of all of them together under the stars. Lily scattered wildflower petals with exuberant enthusiasm. Thomas, the once silent hunter who had appeared at their door during the worst blizzard in decades, spoke more words that day than Sarah had heard from him in their first month of knowing each other. He made promises to the children individually and to Sarah that were both poetic and practical, acknowledging the complexity of the family they were creating while embracing its potential. As Marion wrapped their hands with a traditional woven cord, completing the ceremony, Sarah thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate days trapped in the snowbound cabin to this sun-dappled valley, from grief and isolation to newfound connection, from survival to genuine joy. It had been a path none of them could have anticipated. The elders teach that. The most beautiful things come from the hardest winters, Marion said as she blessed their union. The deepest roots, the strongest branches, the most vibrant flowers. You have weathered the winter. Now grow together toward the light. That evening, they celebrated with a feast at Sarah's cabin, soon to become their shared home. The townspeople of Pinecrest mingled with members of Thomas's extended family, initial awkwardness giving way to shared stories and laughter. Cultural differences remained, but in this space they created together, those differences enhanced rather than divided. When the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Sarah and Thomas stood on the porch under a canopy of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations months earlier. I never expected this, Sarah said softly. After Mark died, I thought that part of life was over. Thomas nodded in understanding. When my family died, I believed the same. Choose isolation, safer. What changed? He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Saw smoke from your cabin, too thin in a blizzard, knew someone needed help. He paused. Did not know I also needed help, until I found you. Sarah leaned into his solid presence, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. The rescuer rescued me. Balance, Thomas said, echoing his grandmother's wisdom. Always balance. Inside the cabin, the children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their family, though transformed by loss, had expanded in unexpected ways. The photograph of Mark still held its place of honor, a reminder of the love that had created this family initially. Beside it now stood a small Navajo blessing bundle, symbol of the new bonds that would carry them forward. Outside, The first leaves were beginning to turn golden at their edges, whispering of autumn's approach. The seasons would continue their eternal cycle. Winter would come again with its challenges and quiet beauty, followed by spring's renewal, summer's abundance, fall's contemplative glow. But Sarah knew that whatever the season, they would face it together. This family forged in the crucible of a blizzard, when a silent hunter had dared to approach a stranger's door, and a desperate widow had found the courage to open it. Autumn painted the Wellington Range in brilliant hues of crimson and gold. The transformation of the cabin began with the season's change, much like the family it would shelter. Thomas approached the renovation with the same quiet precision he brought to everything, blending traditional Navajo building techniques with modern sustainability practices. Sarah returned to teaching, her confidence growing with each day in the classroom. The students responded to her genuine passion for literature, and she found herself rediscovering joy in sharing the stories that had sustained her through her darkest days. The children adjusted to their new family structure with the remarkable adaptability of youth. Emma took a particular interest in Thomas's cultural heritage, asking Marion to teach her Navajo weaving during weekend visits. Jack shadowed Thomas constantly, absorbing knowledge about everything from tool maintenance to tracking wildlife. Lily simply accepted the new arrangement as if it had always been thus, climbing into Thomas's lap for stories with the same easy affection she showed her mother. "Breaking ground today," Thomas announced one crisp October morning. The plans for the cabin expansion spread across the kitchen table. He had spent weeks finalizing the design, incorporating input from each family member. Emma's request for a reading nook with a window seat, Jack's desire for a workshop space, Lily's insistence on a special spot for her growing collection of dolls. Sarah studied the drawings with admiration. Thomas's engineering background was evident in the precise measurements and structural details, while his Navajo heritage influenced the orientation of the addition to maximize natural light and energy efficiency. "It's perfect," she said, tracing the lines with her finger. "A true blending, just like us." The construction became a community effort. Dave from the general store offered discounted materials. Sheriff Collins and several deputies volunteered labor on weekends. Nancy brought meals for the workers. Even Thomas's more reclusive relatives appeared at crucial moments, especially when traditional elements were being incorporated. By Thanksgiving, the exterior structure was complete, the roof sealed against the coming winter. The interior work would continue through the cold months, with Thomas's focused dedication ensuring steady progress. For their first Thanksgiving as a united family, they decided to host both communities, the townspeople of Pinecrest and Thomas's extended family. The gathering transformed their property into a vibrant celebration of cultures, with traditional Navajo dishes alongside classic American Thanksgiving fare. Marion arrived early to help with preparations, bringing sacred herbs to bless the new addition to the cabin. As she and Sarah worked side by side in the kitchen, the elder woman shared stories of her own blended marriage decades earlier. "My husband was half Navajo, half Irish," she revealed, expertly crimping the edge of a pie crust. His mother was a fierce Irish immigrant who fell in love with a Navajo silversmith in Gallup. "Caused quite the scandal in 1937, Sarah glanced at her, surprised. "I had no idea." Marion smiled, the deep lines around her eyes crinkling. "The heart does not recognize boundaries created by others. It knows only what resonates with its own. A rhythm." She pointed her flour-dusted finger toward the window, where Thomas was showing Emma and several other children how to identify animal tracks in the light dusting of early snow. "My grandson found his rhythm again, with you and your children, something I feared would never happen after his loss." "We found each other at the right moment," Sarah reflected, "when we both needed what the other could give." That is the secret of lasting connections, Marion nodded. Not just taking what you need, but giving what only you can offer. The Thanksgiving celebration exceeded all expectations. Nearly 50 people gathered around tables arranged in the main room and the partially finished addition. Sheriff Collins proposed a toast to the unique family that had brought two communities together. Emma recited a poem she had written for the occasion, her confidence growing under Thomas's quiet encouragement. Even Dave, normally reserved, shared a heartfelt story about how Thomas had once rescued his son when the boy got lost hunting. As evening approached, Thomas quietly took Sarah's hand and led her outside. The air was cold and crisp, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Want to show you something?" he said, guiding her toward the workshop where he spent hours creating his intricate wood carvings. Inside, a small wood stove provided warmth. Thomas lit a lantern, illuminating a tarp-covered shape in the center of the room. With deliberate care, he pulled the covering away, revealing an exquisitely crafted cradle. Sarah gasped. The piece was a masterwork of integration. The basic form followed traditional Navajo cradleboard design, but Thomas had incorporated elements that reflected their blended family. The headboard featured carved figures representing each of them, surrounded by symbols of protection and harmony. Along the sides ran a continuous pattern that Sarah recognized as a fusion of traditional Navajo motifs and designs from Mark's family quilt. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "But why?" Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Marion says spirits whisper to her. Tell her family will grow again." Sarah looked up, understanding dawning. "Are you saying Marion believes I'm going to have another baby?" Thomas nodded, his expression conveying both hesitancy and hope. "Grandmother is rarely wrong about such things. Wanted to be prepared. If you wish this." The possibility hadn't occurred to Sarah until this moment. Their intimacy was still relatively new, their family structure just finding its balance. Yet as she considered it, a sense of rightness settled over her. "Another child would be a blessing," she said softly, "a living symbol of our union, while honoring those who came before." Thomas's smile held profound emotion, rare in its unguarded quality. Harmony continuing. When they returned to the gathering, Sarah viewed the assembled family and friends with new perspective, the connections forming between people of different backgrounds, the children playing together without awareness of cultural boundaries, the elders sharing wisdom accumulated through vastly different life experiences. Marion caught her eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod, her ancient eyes twinkling with knowledge. By Christmas, the interior of the cabin addition was nearly complete. Thomas had insisted on finishing Emma's reading nook first, installing the window seat himself and crafting built-in bookshelves that transformed the space into a literary haven. Jack's workshop adjoined Thomas's, the two spaces connected by a Dutch door that could be opened for guidance or closed for independent projects. Lily's room featured a special shelf for her dolls, positioned to catch the morning sunlight. The master bedroom incorporated elements from both their worlds. The hand-woven Navajo rug that had been in Thomas's family for generations lay beside the bed frame that had belonged to Mark's grandparents. On the wall hung a blended dream catcher Thomas and Emma had created together, incorporating materials from both traditions. For their first Christmas as an official family, they honored multiple traditions. A pine tree glittered with ornaments in the main room, while a traditional Navajo winter blessing ceremony was conducted at sunrise. The children received gifts that reflected both heritage paths, books on Navajo culture alongside classic literature, handcrafted toys that taught traditional skills alongside modern games. Thomas's gift to Sarah was a journal bound in hand-tooled leather, the cover depicting the cabin in winter with smoke rising from the chimney. the first image he had seen of her family. "For a new story," he explained. "Our story." Sarah's gift to him was equally meaningful. An antique compass she had discovered in a box of Mark's possessions, restored and engraved with words in Navajo that Marion had helped her translate. "You guided us home." As January's deep cold settled over the mountains, their expanded home became a sanctuary of warmth and connection. Thomas's prediction that he would need occasional solitude proved accurate, but rather than creating distance, his brief retreats to his original cabin served to strengthen their bond. He would return with renewed energy for family life, often bearing small treasures found in the winter forest. Interestingly shaped pine cones for Jack's collections, feathers for Emma's nature journal, smooth stones for Lily's growing assortment. Sarah's teaching career flourished as she integrated elements of Navajo literature into her curriculum, with Thomas occasionally visiting her classroom to share traditional stories. The students responded with genuine interest, particularly when he demonstrated how natural principles found in the stories applied to modern environmental challenges. In February, as another blizzard howled around their now secure cabin, Sarah's suspicion was confirmed. The family gathered by the fireplace as she shared the news they would welcome a new member in late summer. Emma, now 10 and increasingly mature, immediately offered to help with the baby. "I'm old enough to be a real big sister now," she declared. "I can teach the baby about both our traditions." Jack was more practical. "Where will the baby sleep? We just finished building everything." Thomas smiled at his stepson's concern. "Cradle ready. Room can be added when needed." Lily, not quite 5, had the most pressing question. "Will the baby call you Dad like we do now?" The simple inquiry revealed how completely the children had accepted Thomas into their lives. Over the months since the ceremony in the Sacred Valley, they had gradually transitioned from Mr. Thomas to Dad, a development that had moved Thomas deeply when it first occurred. "Yes," Thomas answered Lily with characteristic directness. "Baby will know me only as father." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Thomas stood on the porch, watching the snowflakes swirl in the glow of the porch light Thomas had recently installed. Despite the calendar's insistence that spring would eventually arrive, winter still held the mountains firmly in its grip. "Hard to believe it's been over a year," Sarah said, leaning against him for warmth. "Since that first blizzard when you appeared at our door." Thomas nodded, his arms secure around her shoulders. "Life changes in moments, like an avalanche. Cannot stop, only respond." "You could have just notified the authorities, you know, sent help rather than coming by yourself." He gave her a look that conveyed both amusement and certainty. "Would have been too late, needed direct action." The simplicity of his worldview continued to center Sarah when life became complicated. Thomas assessed situations, determined the most effective response, and acted without hesitation or need for external validation. It was the quality that had saved them during that desperate winter, and it was the foundation of the security he provided their family now. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If the blizzard hadn't happened? If our paths hadn't crossed that way?" Thomas considered her question with his usual thoughtfulness. "Grandmother says some souls meant to find each other will create opportunities if necessary. So the blizzard was just the universe's way of introducing us?" Sarah smiled. "Perhaps." Thomas's eyes held a rare twinkle. "Universe has limited options." In Colorado winter, his subtle humor, emerging more frequently as he relaxed into family life, delighted Sarah. These glimpses of playfulness balanced his naturally serious demeanor, adding new dimensions to their relationship. As winter gradually released its hold on the mountains, Sarah's pregnancy progressed with healthy vigor. The children remained constantly fascinated, Jack keeping careful track of the baby's development in a journal Thomas had made for him, Emma reading everything she could find about infant care, Lily talking to her mother's growing belly with earnest descriptions of all the wonders awaiting the new arrival. Thomas worked steadily on preparations, adding a nursery to their home with the same thoughtful integration of cultures that characterized the rest of their shared space. Marion visited regularly, bringing traditional herbal teas for Sarah and teaching Emma the songs traditionally sung to Navajo infants. In April, a letter arrived that disrupted their harmonious rhythm. It was from Mark's parents in Florida, their first communication since learning of their son's death nearly 18 months earlier. They wrote that they were planning a summer visit to see their grandchildren, whom they barely knew due to the estrangement between them and Mark. Sarah shared the letter with Thomas, concerned about how this sudden interest from Mark's family might affect their carefully constructed balance. They never approved of Mark moving to Colorado, of our life. Here, she explained. They wanted him to join his father's law practice in Tampa. When he chose forestry instead, they practically disowned him. Thomas absorbed this information without immediate comment, his expression thoughtful. Finally he asked, "Children have the right to know all families, all roots. You're not worried about how they might react to our marriage, to our baby on the way?" He met her gaze steadily. "Cannot control others' reactions, only our response to them." His equanimity steadied her, as it always did. "You're right. The children should know their paternal grandparents, regardless of the past complications." They decided to welcome Mark's parents with openness, sending a reply that honestly outlined the changes in their family structure while emphasizing their commitment to honoring Mark's memory and ensuring his children maintained connection to all aspects of their heritage. The response came swiftly, a stiff acknowledgement of their marriage and the expected baby. With confirmation of a 2-week visit in July, the tone suggested reservation rather than hostility, uncertainty rather than rejection. Progress, Thomas observed. As Sarah's due date approached, summer once again transformed the mountains into a lush paradise. The garden they had expanded together flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The children spent long days exploring the forests and streams under Thomas's watchful guidance, learning the rhythms of the natural world that had shaped his own childhood. In early July, Robert and Eleanor Mitchell arrived from Florida, their discomfort with the rustic mountain setting evident in their designer outdoor wear and rental SUV. Initially, their interaction with Thomas was characterized by awkward politeness, their East Coast reserve clashing with his direct, economical communication style. The children, however, bridged the gap with the natural diplomacy of youth. Emma proudly showed her grandparents her collection of books, including several on Navajo culture. Jack enthusiastically displayed the woodworking skills Thomas had taught him. Lily simply climbed into her grandfather's lap and demanded stories about her father as a little boy, a request that gradually melted Robert's formal demeanor. By the end of their first week, observable shifts had occurred. Robert found common ground with Thomas over the structural engineering of the cabin addition, his own background in commercial real estate giving him an appreciation for Thomas's innovative solutions. Eleanor, initially hesitant, was drawn in too. Conversation with Marion during one of the elders' visits, the two grandmothers discovering shared interests despite vastly different life experiences. "They're trying," Sarah observed to Thomas one evening, watching from the porch as Robert helped. Jack set up a telescope Thomas had refurbished for stargazing. "Family finds a way," Thomas replied, "like water through stone, slow but persistent." On their final evening, Robert and Eleanor hosted a dinner at the best restaurant in Westbrook, the nearest town with fine dining. During the meal, Robert cleared his throat and addressed Thomas directly for the first time without the buffer of practical topics. "I want to thank you," he said, the formal phrasing not disguising the genuine emotion behind it, "for taking care of Mark's family when we failed to do so." Thomas acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. "Honor to do so." "We'd like to establish a college fund for the children," Eleanor added. "All of them, including the baby, if that would be acceptable to you both." "The children would benefit from your involvement in their lives," Sarah said carefully. "Financial support is welcome, but your presence, even from a distance, matters more." Robert's eyes, so like Mark's, held uncharacteristic moisture. "We'd like to visit more regularly. Perhaps you could all come to Florida sometimes, especially in winter." The invitation represented more than a vacation opportunity. It was an acknowledgement of their blended family's legitimacy, a step toward genuine integration of the complex branches of their family tree. As July waned, Sarah's time grew near. The Mitchells extended their stay, moved by the imminent arrival of a grandchild, even one not biologically related to them. Their presence proved unexpectedly valuable when Sarah went into labor 3 weeks early. The birth was straightforward, but rapid, with Marion serving as midwife and Eleanor providing surprisingly capable assistance. Sarah delivered a healthy boy just after midnight on August 3rd. Thomas, who had maintained a calm exterior throughout the intensifying labor, found himself momentarily speechless when Marion placed the infant in his arms. "Your son," she said simply. "First child of your body, fifth child of your heart." Thomas looked from the tiny face to Sarah, his expression conveying everything words could not. The profound gift of new life, the honor of her trust, the completion of a circle that had begun in the darkest winter and culminated in the abundance of summer. They named the baby Benjamin Thomas Mitchell Begay, honoring both family lines. Ben, as they would call him, had Thomas's copper complexion and Sarah's green eyes, a living embodiment of their union. The older children accepted him with unbridled enthusiasm, each finding their own way to welcome the newest member of their unconventional family. Robert and Eleanor, preparing to return to Florida, promised to visit for Christmas. Their initial discomfort with the cultural differences now transformed into curious interest. Eleanor had even requested reading materials on Navajo traditions from Marion, who provided them with characteristic generosity of spirit. As August ripened toward September, their family settled into new rhythms, accommodating the infant's needs. Thomas proved to be a natural with the baby, his patience and quiet confidence creating a secure environment for Ben's earliest days. The cradle he had crafted months earlier, guided by Marion's prophetic wisdom, stood beside their bed, its protective, Zimbal's watching over the newest Mitchell Begay. On a perfect late summer evening, with Ben sleeping peacefully in his cradle and the older children gathering the last of the day's raspberries from the garden, Sarah and Thomas sat on their expanded porch, looking out over the mountains that had brought them together. "I found something yesterday," Sarah said, reaching into her pocket, "when I was organizing Mark's old desk." She handed Thomas a weathered page, torn from a journal. Thomas unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar to him. Mark's, he presumed. "Read it," Sarah encouraged softly. Thomas read aloud, his deep voice giving weight to words written by a man he had never met, but whose legacy he honored daily. "Strange dream last night. Saw Sarah and the kids in a terrible blizzard, cabin freezing. Supplies low. I couldn't reach them, but someone else could. A figure I couldn't quite make out. Someone from the mountains, someone who knew the old ways. He brought them safety, warmth, hope. Woke up unsettled, but somehow comforted too. Probably just anxiety about the forestry budget cuts affecting emergency services this winter. Still, think I'll stock extra firewood this week, just in case." Thomas looked up, the paper trembling slightly in his steady hands. When did he write this? "The entry is dated September 12th, just 2 weeks before his heart attack," Sarah said. "He never mentioned the dream to me." They sat in silence, absorbing the implications. Had Mark somehow perceived the danger his family would face? Had some part of him reached across the boundaries between life and death to arrange their salvation? Grandmother says, "Time is not a straight line," Thomas finally said, "more like the web. Connections forward, backward, sideways." Sarah leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Whatever forces brought you to our door that day, Mark's dream, Marion's web of time, or just your own observations of our thinning chimney smoke, I'm grateful beyond words." Thomas gazed at the mountains turning purple in the evening light. The same mountains that had both isolated and protected them, that had presented deadly challenge and life-changing opportunities. "Paths cross for purpose," he said, his arms secure around his wife as their children's laughter floated from the garden. "Winter teaches survival. Spring teaches hope. Summer teaches abundance." He looked down at the journal page in his hand, this message across time from the man whose family he now protected. All seasons necessary for complete life. Above them, the first star appeared in the deepening blue sky. Ben's cry came from inside the cabin, followed by Emma's voice assuring them she would check on her baby brother. Jack and Lily raced up the porch steps, carrying containers of sun-warmed raspberries, their faces flushed with life and purpose. Thomas carefully refolded Mark's journal page and returned it to Sarah. Tomorrow, they would place it in the family memory box they were creating for all the children, a repository of their complex, interwoven history, the full truth of how this family had formed through both loss and discovery, through the darkest blizzard and the brightest summer dawn. For now, they simply received the gift of the present moment. This porch, these mountains, these children, this life they had built together after a silent Navajo hunter had dared to approach a widow's cabin door and a desperate mother had found the courage to open it. 10 years had passed since that fateful blizzard. The Mitchell-Begay family gathered on the expanded deck of their mountain home, celebrating Emma's return from her first year at the University of Arizona, where she studied anthropology with a focus on indigenous textile arts. At 25, she had grown into a confident young woman whose thesis exhibition had drawn attention from cultural preservation foundations across the Southwest. Jack, now 22, had recently graduated from Colorado State with dual degrees in forestry and sustainable architecture, following both his biological father's path and his stepfather's expertise. His senior project, an innovative design for fire-resistant mountain dwellings incorporating traditional Navajo building principles, had earned national recognition. 17-year-old Lily, preparing for her senior year of high school, had developed her childhood love of storytelling into award-winning documentary filmmaking. Her latest project chronicled the Healing Retreat program her parents had established at Thomas's original cabin, capturing the transformative journeys of families recovering from trauma, and 15-year-old Ben, the physical embodiment of their blended family, moved seamlessly between worlds, captain of his high school track team, apprentice to Marion in traditional healing practices, and passionate advocate for environmental conservation. His unique perspective as a child of both cultures made him a natural bridge builder in their expanding community work. The celebration coincided with another milestone, the 10th anniversary of the Mountain Haven Healing Center, the retreat program Thomas and Sarah had founded to help families touched by loss. What had begun as a simple repurposing of Thomas's original cabin had expanded into a nationally recognized program combining indigenous wisdom with contemporary therapeutic approaches. Families from across the country now came to the mountains, seeking the same renewal Thomas and Sarah had found together. "Remember when we thought this deck would be big enough?" Sarah laughed, surveying the crowded space where extended family, friends, and program graduates mingled. Robert and Eleanor Mitchell, now in their 70s but still vibrant, chatted with Marion Begay, whose ancient face had only grown more dignified with her advancing years. Sheriff Collins, retired but still robust, swapped stories with Dave from the general store. Nancy Wilson, her hair now silver, supervised a group of children performing a traditional dance they had learned during the summer program. Thomas, standing slightly apart, as was still his occasional habit even after all these years of family life, caught Sarah's eye across the gathering. His once midnight hair now showed threads of silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his quiet strength remained unchanged. With a slight nod, he indicated the trail leading to the viewpoint above their property. Sarah understood immediately. Extracting herself from a conversation with Emma's anthropology professor, she made her way through the celebration to join her husband. Together, they walked the familiar path without speaking, their silence comfortable and communicative after years of partnership. The viewpoint offered a panoramic vista of the valley below, the small community of Pinecrest visible in the distance, the mountains beyond stretching to the horizon. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow in a riot of summer color, and a family of deer grazed peacefully at the forest edge. 20 years since losing Eliza and David, Thomas said quietly, naming his first wife and son for the first time in many years. 25 since Mark's passing, Sarah nodded, understanding the significance of this rare moment of reflection. Thomas rarely spoke of his first family, the wound healed, but never forgotten. They remain part of us, she replied, slipping her hand into his. In everything we've built, Thomas squeezed her fingers gently. I had a dream last night, like Mark's dream you found in a journal. Sarah looked up at him with interest. Thomas's dreams had always carried special significance in their family, often containing insights or guidance that proved valuable. I saw a blizzard again, he continued, but different. I was lost in a storm. You found me. Let me go home. His eyes met hers directly. Not just you, all of you, Emma, Jack, Lily, Ben, Marion, Mitchell parents, everyone gathered below. All led me from the storm. The simple recounting held profound meaning. Thomas, who had once been the rescuer, appearing, like salvation at a desperate family's door, acknowledging the ways in which they had, in turn, rescued him from his self-imposed isolation following his first family's tragic death. We found each other, Sarah said softly, echoing words they had shared many times over the years. All of us. Wanted to show you something, Thomas said, reaching into the pocket of his vest. He withdrew an object wrapped in soft leather. The traditional way he had always presented his most meaningful gifts. Sarah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden carving unlike any Thomas had created before. Nestled in her palm was a miniature replica of their family home as it had evolved over the years, exquisitely detailed from the original cabin at its heart to the thoughtful additions that had accommodated their growing family and work. Remarkable, she breathed, turning it to appreciate the intricate details. Each window was precisely placed, each architectural element captured with loving accuracy. Look inside, Thomas suggested. Sarah discovered that the tiny structure opened on hidden hinges. Within, Thomas had carved miniature representations of each family member, positioned throughout the rooms in characteristic activities. Emma at her loom, Jack at his drafting table, Lily with her camera, Ben surrounded by plants in the greenhouse, Sarah at her desk, and Thomas himself in his workshop. But there was more. In the original cabin section, almost imperceptible unless one knew to look, were 3 additional figures, a woman and a small boy Sarah recognized as Eliza and David, and a man whose stance unmistakably suggested Mark. All present, Thomas said simply. All part of the story. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes at the profound gesture. After 15 years together, Thomas could still move her deeply with his thoughtful integration of past and present, honoring all that had come before, while celebrating what they had built together. "It's perfect," she whispered, carefully reclosing the miniature home. "When did you find time to create this?" A hint of a smile touched Thomas's lips. "Winter project, when you thought I was designing new retreat cabins. You were doing that." "Two," Sarah pointed out, knowing his capacity for focused work. Thomas nodded, acknowledging this with characteristic humility. Then his expression grew more serious. "Want to discuss something about the future?" Sarah recognized the tone. Thomas never raised important matters casually. "What is it?" Tribal Council asked again. "Educational position. Would require significant time on reservation." He paused. "You also received an offer. University position. Teaching literature with indigenous focus." Sarah had indeed received an unexpected offer from the University of Colorado to develop a new program integrating indigenous literary traditions with classical literature studies. The position would be demanding but deeply meaningful, a culmination of the educational approaches she had pioneered over the years. "You think we should accept both offers?" she said, reading the direction of his thoughts. Thomas nodded. "Children grown or grow. Our work at the Healing Center was established. Strong staff can manage daily operations." He gestured toward the gathering below. "Time for a new chapter, new service." The suggestion might once have seemed radical, uprooting the stable life they had established in this mountain home that had witnessed their journey from crisis to thriving community. But Sarah understood the deeper continuity Thomas perceived. Their work had always been about integration of cultures, of past and present, of loss and renewal. These new roles would extend that mission to broader communities. "What about the house?" she asked. "This place has been the heart of everything we've built." "Always remains home," Thomas assured her. "Base for family gatherings, retreat during breaks." He looked out over the vista they both loved. "But perhaps, and time for others to live here full-time, continue work." Sarah followed his gaze to where Ben was now leading a group of younger children in what appeared to be a nature identification game at the edge of the forest. At 15, he already showed remarkable leadership abilities and a deep commitment to the healing work his parents had established. "You're thinking of Ben eventually taking over the program," she surmised. "When ready," Thomas qualified. "After education, experience elsewhere, important to leave, return by choice." The wisdom in this perspective was characteristically Thomas. Understanding the importance of allowing their children to forge their own paths while keeping doors open for possible return. It was the same balanced approach that had guided their blended family through all the challenges of the past 15 years. As they made their way back down the trail toward the celebration, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled together. From that desperate moment when survival itself had seemed uncertain, through the careful building of trust and connection, to this point of abundant life and purpose, it had been a path neither could have envisioned alone. The gathering came. Into view below them, the extended family they had created through both blood and choice, engaged in the comfortable interactions of people who genuinely belonged together despite their different origins. Marion sat in a place of honor, Ben at her feet absorbing her stories with characteristic intensity. Jack and Emma engaged in animated conversation with professors from their respective fields. Lily filmed it all, her documentary instincts never completely at rest. "Mom, Dad," Ben called, spotting them on the trail. "Grandmother Marion says it's time for the blessing ceremony." Thomas and Sarah exchanged a glance of shared understanding. Marion had marked every significant family milestone, with traditional blessings adapted to honor their unique family composition. This one would acknowledge not just Emma's academic achievement and the center's anniversary, but also launch whatever new chapter they would begin together. The ceremony unfolded as twilight approached, the mountains turning purple against the gold-streaked sky. Marion conducted the proceedings with the quiet authority that had only deepened with her advancing years. Each family member participated, offering symbols of their shared journey, Emma with a small square of her first successful weaving, Jack with a piece of wood from his earliest carpentry project, Lily with a film clip of their first family gathering, Ben with herbs he had harvested under Marion's guidance. Robert and Eleanor Mitchell contributed a photograph of Mark as a child, acknowledging the foundation upon which this blended family had been built. Thomas added a carving of a snow-covered cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, the image that had first drawn him to Sarah's door during that fateful blizzard. Sarah completed the circle with the turquoise pendant Thomas had given her those years ago, the symbol of protection, strength, and healing that had come to represent their journey together. As Marion blessed each offering and the assembled family, Sarah observed the faces illuminated by the ceremonial fire. Each bore the imprint of their shared story, the challenges weathered, the joys celebrated, the losses honored, the growth achieved. Yet each also maintained their distinct identity, their unique contribution to the whole they had created together. When the ceremony concluded, the celebration continued under the stars. Musicians from both cultural traditions played together, creating harmonies that would have once seemed impossible, but now felt natural and right. Children of various backgrounds played games Thomas had learned in his own childhood, adapted for this mountain setting so different from the Arizona reservation where he had been raised. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing with Thomas on the porch of their home, watching as cars wound down the mountain, road-bearing loved ones back to their respective homes. The children had retired to their rooms, with friends staying overnight, their laughter and conversation drifting occasionally through open windows. Full circle, Thomas observed, his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. From desperate winter to abundant summer. "And autumn is approaching," Sarah added, acknowledging the new transition they were considering. Thomas nodded. Each season brings gifts. Winter taught survival. Spring brought hope. Summer gave abundance. He looked down at her with the same quiet intensity that had first drawn her to him. Autumn offers harvest, wisdom to share. The philosophy was quintessentially Thomas, finding meaning and purpose in the natural cycles, applying their lessons to human experience. It had guided their family through every transition, providing a framework for understanding changes that might otherwise have seemed disruptive. "Whatever we decide about the university and reservation positions," Sarah said, "this place remains the heart of everything. The children will always know where home is. Home is not just a place," Thomas reminded her, echoing a teaching he had shared since their earliest days together. "Home is people, connections, belonging." Sarah nodded, leaning into his familiar strength. "I know, but this particular place holds our story in every board and beam, every addition and alteration. From that first desperate night when you appeared through the blizzard to now, it's all here in the structure itself." Thomas considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Like the carving I made, house holds family, family holds a story." He gestured toward the mountains silhouetted against the night sky, and mountains hold all of it, unchanging, eternal. The simple observation captured the essence of their journey, individual lives unfolding within the greater permanence of the natural world, each generation building upon the foundations laid by those who came before, each family creating its unique narrative within the universal human experience of love, loss, and renewal. Inside the house, A burst of laughter erupted from the children's wing, followed by Ben's distinctive voice, calling for quiet with the good-natured authority he had developed as the youngest in their blended family. "Never imagined this," Sarah said softly. "That day in the blizzard, with supplies dwindling and Lily sick, I couldn't see beyond the next hour, the next day. Survival was the only goal." "And for me," Thomas acknowledged, "approaching as strangers. Doctor was merely necessity. No vision of family, future, just immediate need. Yet from those moments of crisis and simple human response, everything had flowed. Their initial cautious connection, the gradual building of trust, the careful integration of their different worlds, the creation of a family and community that transcended conventional boundaries. Marion always says the most powerful medicine comes from unexpected sources," Sarah reflected. "That healing often arrives in forms we don't recognize at first." Thomas nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains that had both isolated and saved them, that had presented a deadly challenge and life-changing opportunity. Wisdom in that, blizzard nearly took your life, also brought new life. As they turned to enter their home for the night, Sarah paused for one last look at the star-filled sky above the mountains that had witnessed their extraordinary journey. From desperate widow to confident educator, from grieving mother to the matriarch of a thriving blended family, from isolated survivor to community builder, her path had unfolded in ways she could never have anticipated when she first opened her cabin door to the silent Navajo hunter who had dared to approach through the deadly storm. Thomas followed her gaze, understanding without words the reflection that occupied her thoughts. After 15 years together, their connection allowed such silent communication, one of the many gifts that had emerged from their unlikely beginning. "Grandmother taught that life follows a circle," he said quietly. "End becomes beginning. Crisis contains opportunity. Strangers become family." He turned to her, his expression, holding all the depth of their shared journey, "Opens when ready." Sarah recognized the reference to her desperate decision to open the cabin door that fateful day, despite her fear of the unknown figure standing in the blizzard. It had been the pivotal moment, the choice that changed everything, that set them on this extraordinary path together. She took his hand, the same hand that had once extended life-saving supplies in the midst of a killer storm, that had taught her children invaluable skills, that had built their home and carved beautiful objects, that told their family story, that had held hers through joy and challenge for 15 remarkable years. "Best decision I ever made," she said simply. Together, they entered the home they had created, not just the physical structure with its thoughtful integration of different architectural traditions, but the deeper dwelling place of connection, purpose, and belonging that had emerged from that desperate winter when a silent hunter had approached a widow's door, and a new kind of family had begun to form from the most unlikely of beginnings. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.